Hi everyone, so when Games Workshop announced that they were releasing a new Terminator Chaplain sculpt to go alongside the new Terminator sculpt, I was really excited because who doesn't like a grimdark Chaplain, especially one in Terminator armour. But then they revealed the model. And to be honest, I think one of the reasons why I'm not drawn to the model really is the fact that it hasn't got all the little details on it that you associate with Chaplains in 40k. So to be honest, I held off buying one purely and simply because I had no urge really to add it to my collection, let alone paint it. However, I finally decided to take the plunge and buy the model, but I wanted to see if I could try to improve it, at least in my opinion anyway. So as you can see, I've made the Chaplain, but I left off the arms because I'm going to do some modifications to the torso. To begin with, I'm going to scrape off the detail on his chest. I'm going to do this because I'm going to add some bone details to that section. Right, so now we've got a clear surface to work with. I'm actually going to start using Greenstuff to try and add some of those bone details in there. Bear in mind, this is the first time I've used Greenstuff, so it won't be the best sculpt in the world, but it gives you an idea. Now I know the sternum should be relatively smooth, but I wanted to add more detail, so I'll begin adding indents to the Greenstuff. Once those have been done, I roll some more Greenstuff into thin strips and then add those to the model following the lines of the original sculpt. Now obviously if you like that little detail that's on his chest originally, you can always leave it. I just wanted to emphasise the bone element of the armour. So now that I'm happy with all the details I've added, which isn't loads, but in my opinion I think it's made him more of a Chaplain than he was before. So I smooth all the green stuff off and then it's time to prime. It's interesting to see how it looks now, even with only the primer applied. And like I said, this is the first time I've used Greenstuff, so yeah, I was pretty impressed with it. Right, so as always, I'm going to look at the model and break it into sections, identifying the sort of largest sections of the model and work my way from there. So obviously in this case, it's going to be his armour. Now, as this is black armour, I'm going to use the same recipe as the one I used in my Asmodai tutorial. So if you want an in-depth look at how I painted black armour, I recommend watching that video, which I'll link at the end of this one. But fundamentally, I use black, strong dark blue, turquoise, white and black Templar contrast paint in various sort of mixes. With the black armour now done, it's time to shift focus to the bone details, and this is one of my go-to recipes for this. I begin by basing the relevant sections with a dark brown, and then brighten sections by adding a yellow brown, beige grey and finally ivory. I find when painting bone it helps being quite scratchy with your brushstrokes, as this helps build up the sense of texture, and this will be present throughout all the subsequent steps. Once you're happy with the look, you can glaze your dark brown into the recesses. Now with the bone details done, I'm going to look at the purity seals and the parchment specifically that's dotted around the model. I'm going to do this because I'm going to be using similar colours that I use for the bone. However, I want to have some differentiation between the colours because obviously it adds more interest to the model and it helps you read elements differently. Right, so to begin with, I'm going to use the two starting colours that I use for the bone. And this is because I think it provides a really good base for the parchment. But instead of leading up to ivory sort of colours, I'm going to use greys instead. And again, as you can see, I'm still using the scratchy brush strokes because I don't want it to look smooth like fabric. Okay, so now I'm going to be looking at painting the trim on his armour and the shield. I've decided I'm going to try my hand again at non-metallic metal. I'm still not master at it, but you know, practice makes perfect. Now I found that when trying to paint non-metallic metal, your key sort of areas to focus on are your highlight placements, because that's what really sells the idea of it being metallic. Obviously you get into the blending side of it, so it's really nice and smooth, and that's a whole other skill set in itself. But just to practice the non-metallics, it can be quite good just to get your sort of highlight placements down properly and get those light reflections in the right places. And you also want to bear in mind when you're doing your light placements, you want them to be consistent. Imagine you've got like a line going across your body and the light source is here. That highlight placement always follow the same kind of path, because that helps it read like metal. If you start having highlights on different sections at different angles, it can muddle it up a bit. Ultimately, it can confuse the point of light. Now that's not a hard and fast rule because obviously you've got bounce highlights and things as well. And yeah, I mean, non-metallic metal's a whole other category in itself, so I'm not going to go into too much in this video. But if you're just starting out and you want to try non-metallic metal, keep it simple. Just have your one source of light and keep it consistent. And obviously when you're starting out, don't worry too much about the blending side of things, because that again is a whole other skill in itself. Once you get your light placement down, it'll start to make sense, and then you can try to do more of the glazing in and experiment a bit more. Now to start building up the saturation. I begin by using British khaki, as this yellow-brown isn't too intense of a colour jump, and it's a great start to sketching where the highlights will be. From here I've gone with Japanese brown, as this has more yellow present compared to the khaki. Remember, when placing the highlights again, you want to cover a smaller area each time, as it's the intensity of the light reflection that you want to sell. From here I add ice yellow, which will desaturate it but not overly so like white would. And I end this highlighting process with pure ice yellow. Now to really sell those reflections, I add a dot of white. Now if you want to try and unify these layers except the white spot highlight, you can glaze some of that dark brown back into the recesses. But just be careful not to overdo it, as it'll look too stark against the brighter sections. Now similarly with the gold, you want to build up those reflections. You want to leave black in the recesses, but the first base layer is a dark grey, and I really like Tenebrous grey, as it has a dark purple quality to it. Now I'm going to start lighting it up, and I do this by adding dark blue grey and ultimately end with a spot highlight of pure white, just like the non-metallic metal. Okay, so now I'm going to try something new actually. And I've seen a few other sort of artists do something similar, and that's by adding a light emanating from up his helmet. Now obviously this is completely optional, you can just leave it as is, but you know, I just thought I'd give it a go and show you guys how I went about it. So I'm going to start using an airbrush, and I know some of you won't have an airbrush, but you can actually replicate this using like a dry brush or stippling. I just find an airbrush is just quicker, really. So I begin by applying a dark red. As you can see, the area is now going to be the base for the glow effect. I then go over the area with white ink, and you'll see why in the next step. I then move on to Bale red contrast paint over those white areas. As you can see, the white ink really helps the red pop. I then go back in with the brush and repeat the previous two steps to emphasise key areas and make them brighter than the surrounding area. Finally, I add an orange glaze to point to the most intense area of light. Okay, now the light effect's not going to sell unless we have some of those reflections appearing on the helmet. So I repeat the previous steps to sell the reflection on the metallic details. I don't use the airbrush, and I just add orange to burnt red in increasing amounts until I'm happy. Now I find that with the Terminator sculpts, you've got the vents on their back, and I think that it's a really good opportunity to add a little bit more interest to the model by having like the heat effect emanating from behind, because I feel that this sort of conveys the amount of power that's needed to get effectively a walking tank sort of moving across a battlefield. So I start by adding a deep red all over the vents and gradually increase the saturation by moving into oranges and ultimately all the way up to pure ice yellow. As you can see, I work further into the middle of the vent each time. And finally, when I'm happy with that sort of heat gradient, I then add a Tenebris Grey and Dark Blue mix to the edges of the vent to indicate that those areas are cooler. Right, so that's it really. I didn't cover how I painted the handle of his Crozius, or his shoulder indicating the chapter to which he belongs, because obviously I think you guys probably have your own preferences on what colours you might want to paint those. My guy's going to be for Dark Angels, obviously. So thank you for making it to the end of the video. I hope you guys enjoyed it and found it useful. Typical YouTube stuff. If you don't mind liking and subscribing, it really helps me out and it's very much appreciated. And thank you so much to all of you who already subscribe. I managed to hit 600 subscribers, which is amazing. So yeah, I'll see you guys in the next one.